I heard a voice that said it's going to be recorded, so we're starting. And now I'll start sharing my PowerPoint again. There we go. Okay, so this is the presentation of the European Studies on Society, Science and Technology program. At the outset, I should tell you, this is not the MA program European Studies. So if you're interested in EU politics and that sort of thing, this is not your program. You should go to another one. I hope we're not losing more people now. Maybe we'll gain some back of people who are at the ES Master's program presentation who need to be here. But it's an entirely different subject matter. And the European in our title actually refers to the fact that this master's program is part of a European network of partner universities, which I will tell you a little bit more about that later. But it has not to do with the subject matter. So we don't study Europe. We study science and technology in interaction with society. Okay, we're still all there, so I guess this is okay. Thank you for coming up, for showing up, and welcome again. So I'm Geert Somsen, and Samuel Gürtel is my co-presenter. I will tell you a few things about the program. He will tell you about, what it is to experience the program as a student, which is, of course, in the end, what this is all about. And here on the picture, you see what a master's open day usually looks like when we don't have Corona and we are actually at the faculty. These are two of last year's students, but unfortunately this year we must do it like this, although it may we also have saved you some travel. So I'm going to be talking about the contents of the program, but also about how we approach that subject matter and sort of what our style of teaching is, the problem-based learning method that we apply at Maastricht University. And then Samuel will tell you, what it's like to do EST and to live in Maastricht. So what is EST about? I'm still going to ask you, you don't need to speak up if you don't want to be recorded, but otherwise feel free to. What are associations that you have? What do you think EST is about? Because it's an unusual subject matter, so I'm wondering. Nitsan, Amy, Annika, any ideas?
For me, what comes to mind is, for example, civilian surveillance.
All right, yeah. With cameras and
yeah.
things.
Yeah, and regulation around that, and the moral issues.
Yeah.
And also technological issues.
Right. Yeah. So something really that combines technology, ethics, social life. Yeah. Excellent. Anyone else? What would you associate with EST's subject matter? Amy and I can stay silent, but that's also fine. Well, as I said, it's not, it's when you study European law, it's European law, or psychology, it's psychology. EST is a less common subject. That also means that once you enter the program, you find yourself among students who've deliberately chosen the subject matter. So you really share a particular interest, which is very nice. You're like a little gang who's like that. I would like to illustrate the contents of the EST program by referring to the Netflix series Black Mirror. It's not just Netflix, I think it's a British BBC or Channel 4 series. Do you know, anybody knows Black Mirror? Yeah? Anybody?
Not familiar with the specific episode, but yeah.
Okay, but you know the series?
Yeah.
Yeah, can you maybe say it, characterize it, Nitsan?
I think they took like different scenarios and it's kind of like dystopic for me.
Yeah, definitely dystopic.
Yeah, if you take like a certain like technological technology or some kind of development and take it all the way to the end and see what happens when you use it, like not in a good way.
Exactly, yeah. I guess a key word here would be extrapolate. So Black Mirror is kind of science fiction, but it's about a future that's really close to what we already know. So it starts with its current situation or extrapolates it to and extreme. And I'll illustrate it by the episode Nosedive, which is about this lady who, like us all, is carrying around a smartphone all the time. And in the world that she lives in, so in near future, these things get used for rating things all the time. We already do that, of course. But it's not just things, but it's also people getting rated here. So this is her own rating that she received. And she received double damage here because she's just been yelling at an airport attendant, and everybody around her is shocked and starts to bring her number down. And this means that she doesn't get access to the airplane anymore. And she needs to go to a wedding, and suddenly she's no longer qualified to attend a wedding. So it's a society in which people are graded, basically, and those grades have serious consequences. So when she looks at Mr. Keith here through electronic lens, she immediately sees what he's worth, and what these people are worth, and they're all worth a lot. That's why they look so pretty. But she ends up looking like this, because of course the whole thing goes wrong, right? She gets double damage and her rating goes down. She can't catch the plane. She ends up in the gutter, basically, with some people who say, well, we ended up in the gutter too, and screw the system. We are starting our alternative society with no ratings whatsoever. It's a funny extension and fantasy, but it's also not completely unimaginable. And why this has to do with EST is that this future prediction or scenario, as Nitsan rightly called it, is, like most future predictions, centered on a technological development, right? So this is idea that technology will develop and data will change and affect the way we live, and then we have to live with the consequences. That's basically the idea of Black Mirror. I'd recommend it. It's a really interesting series that's also very susceptible to the kind of analyses that we do in EST. I'm going to give you another example, and that's not from a TV series, but just a particular technology, namely the one that we all have in our pockets, the cell phone, the mobile phone. Here you see TV versus phone watching numbers. And you see, already a few years ago, we look more at our phones than at our TVs. I don't know if this is your own experience. It certainly is mine. That's the user statistics. But what I want to pick out the cell phone for is that not only does it have a huge impact, it's also an impact in very many different dimensions. So we can also look at the technology of the mobile phone from various angles. The simplest one, I guess, is the one on the bottom left here, which is just the development of the machine itself, right? How did it evolve over time? And the suggestion, of course, here is that it became smaller and smaller until it started to become bigger again. But that's sort of the hardware look at this. But as already mentioned, technologies often come with ethical issues. And from the very first start of cell phones, I actually remember that myself, there were concerns about health issues, about if you hold this radiating thing next to your head, because it's basically a radio transmitter, what does it do with your ear and your brain? And research was done on that. Or how may it impede your safety if you stare at it while partaking in traffic, right? So now I think in the Netherlands, at least, some laws have been implemented to stop this sort of behavior where people look at a phone while cycling, to my great relief, I must say, because I cycle a lot. But it's not just ethical questions. Technologies also have something to do with our culture, with a lowercase c. So, you know, the way we behave and the things that we think are normal. The picture you see here is, of course, extremely common now. People making a phone call on the train. When cell phones were first introduced, this was sort of a faux pas. It was not done because anybody could hear your private conversation, and it was not supposed to happen. It's funny now you got so used to it that you think like, what's the problem, right? But people did have problems with it. And of course, this is still a problem. People not paying attention in traffic. And this has also become normal, right? It's a train packed full of passengers. They're all very closely together. They're all talking and communicating with others, except it's not the people in the train, it's people elsewhere. That's the way we are today, isn't it? You can find it problematic or normal, etc. But it's clear that technologies affect our cultural norms and values and our senses of normalcy, really. Another perspective of cell phones would be an economic and at the same time geopolitical one, because technological enthusiasts will always, talk about the advancement, the progress, and the spread of technology. But what I often forget to mention is that this spread is very uneven. Not everybody can afford these technologies, and cell phone ownership or even internet access are really not for everybody, and it makes a huge difference, right? So, well, I guess you can imagine what the consequences of these are. So this is another dimension that's important to take into account when you analyze what a technology does. From below, so to speak, from the grassroots, however, there's another dimension I think that deserves using, and that's discussion, and that's the usage of technologies. Engineers design technologies because they are supposed to do this and that for the customer, but that customer then often does something entirely different with it, right? The gramophone was first designed by Edison as a secretary instruction instrument. So you could record your voice, a secretary could play it and then type out your text. It was never meant to play music on, but this developed on later because people started to use the technology for a different purpose. This Masai herdsman in Kenya uses a cell phone to connect somebody far away to tell him or her where the herds are going, or what's the price of meat or milk back there. And when cell phones first came around, it was kind of expensive to make these sort of phone calls, especially in regions like this. Users developed a way in which they could communicate without picking up the phone. So you let it ring 3 times and that meant something. You let it ring 1 time and it meant something. And because you didn't pick up the phone, you didn't have to pay for the conversation. Completely unplanned behavior, but one that became very important. And as the case of the gramophone illustrates, it can become the usage. It can become very important. Here's another dimension of technology we can discuss. It's not the cell phone though, but something else, namely the technology of this type of bench, freshly placed at the Dutch train station. Can anybody guess what the micropolitics are of these benches? Because they're not neutral objects, Nitsan. Yeah.
Homeless people.
What?
Homeless people.
Exactly, yeah. These armrests that you see here, I don't know if you
We
can
have
see
that
them.
in Tel Aviv as well.
Oh, you live in Tel Aviv? Right.
Yeah.
And you have the same sort of bench?
It's starting to spread also, like benches for one person, so they can be used like that.
When were they introduced? Do you remember that?
Last few years, it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
There's still a mix of the old kind and the new kind of benches.
Right, right. I think in the Netherlands it was about 15 years ago when train stations, they used to be this sort of windy place where you'd hang out and were kind of dirty. And then it became places with shops and everything, where you could go to buy your perfume or clothing even, and all kinds of fancy coffee. And then they were really wanting to get rid of the kind of person you don't want in such an environment, namely homeless people. So these armrests here, of course, are not armrests. Well, they are armrests, but their main purpose is to prevent this, right? That homeless people lie down and take a nap. Now, I'm not, we can reject this or something or be upset about it, but the point is that technologies, even a simple one like this, are not neutral. They have a script, as we call it. They force or nudge people into certain behaviors. And therefore, they are ethical, moral agents even, and have an effect. And that's another way we can study it. All right, so I've taken a few technologies and see how many dimensions these have. And I could have the same sort of story, not about technology, but about science, right? Currently, we're all very aware of the societal implications and entanglements of the science of epidemiology or virology, right? Because they tell us what the virus is doing and how it spreads, or what they don't know about that yet. And the societal implications, of course, are obvious. Not that they have automatic implications. Politicians need to translate them into measures. People have to comply with those measures or not. But you can see how the science of virology has become a part of a huge societal network that's really changing our world. Not a neutral fact-finding enterprise, that's science, right? Okay, so what we do in EST is study that sort of phenomenon. And the main point is to look at science and technology, not just from the point of view of those sciences and technologies and the people creating them, but from a wider perspective, to look at the culture, the politics, the social relations that come into these, into these phenomena and into the dynamics of science and technology in society. And we do that by adopting perspectives from various humanities and social sciences and applying those lenses on the science and technology. And that provides a new perspective that has a much bigger scope in which you can understand and deal with these developments better. So we want to understand how science and technology develop in interaction with our society. And sometimes we want to be able to intervene or at least to advise how this can be improved, right? So that's also part of the program. And as Albert Einstein already said, you need a new perspective sometimes to get away in order to be able to solve the problems created. So EST is a program. I hope you see now what the sort of subject matter is. The program studies this. It's done that for almost 25 years now. It's a very old master's program because it started already before you had the bachelor master structure in higher education that we have since 2002. It pre-existed, and it's from the early 90s actually, but of course it's changed a lot over time. These are some of the sort of basic facts. I'll get through them a little bit later. I want to lift out two. One is that since we are part of this European network and you can do your specialization abroad, you always get two diplomas. You get one from Maastricht University and one from the European Inter-University Association that EST is part of. That's our network. The second point I wanted to say is that under point 2, I say great external assessments. That sounds a little bit braggy, which of course it is, but we'd like to do that because they have been very good. Last year, the master's program was re-accredited, as it's called. So we had an inspection committee come over and study it for over a year, actually. We had to provide them with information. They paid a visit. They interviewed teachers, students, alumni, etc. And well, we came out with very positive remarks. We scored the maximum score on all counts, and the committee was really wondering why we didn't attract more students, because of the job we're doing. I guess I'm bragging about that because I'm very happy with that result, but why not? Why should I not mention it? I think externals say we're doing really well, and sometimes also saying, shouldn't you be attracting like 10 times the students that you do? Personally, I think not, because I think one of our strengths is that we're a small program that keeps students and staff close. It will be very different with 200 students. And I don't see this happening either. We've had a very stable cohort size for all this time now. It's always about 20 students. Okay. So if you want to understand science and technology and their interaction with society, this is how we do it in EST. We have a program that consists of 2 semesters. The first semester is really a crash course in all those different perspectives. So every 4 weeks, we have a new module starts that takes a particular perspective on science and technology. So you do always only one course at a time. It lasts 4 weeks. It's really concentrated, and then you move on to the next. And these are our 5 courses in the first semester. September, October, November, December, and January, basically. Sorry. As my predecessor, Vincent Lagendijk, said, the structure of our program is a pizza quattro stagione, the 4 seasons pizza, in the sense that we start with the bottom, the pie, basically a basic course in understanding technological development through a number of important theories. And then after that introductory course, I hope you can see my pointer, we have 4 different flavors, namely 4 different approaches to science and technological development. The first one is sort of anthropological. In the second module, you study how science is being done by visiting a laboratory and see how these scientists behave and what they're doing, observe them. Now, in the Corona, of course, has become difficult. So this year, students actually have done the same by interviewing scientists, but the approach is more or less the same, right? The third module offers a new perspective again, and that's a historical perspective. So we look at the rise of modern science. That's mathematical, that's experimental, etc. during the scientific revolution. We look at the rise of industrial society, the industrial revolution, and we'll learn how historians have understood those developments, try to understand those developments from their various perspectives. Module 4 then has perspective of economics and innovation theory. So it's more about the monetary investments in scientific and technological development. Module 5 has a political science perspective called politics of knowledge. So this is very much about the non-political neutrality of different kinds of knowledge and technology. I think we've already touched upon those things. So at the end of the first semester, you've done these basic course and then 4 perspectives on scientific and technological development, and you have a lot under your belt. You really have experienced how to apply certain theoretical lenses to the phenomena at hand. So you're really ready then to go and do that and apply them. And therefore, in the next semester, most of your time will be devoted to your research project that ends in the thesis, where you take a particular case, you set up, you design a research project, and you investigate what went on there, right? Through using the theory and the methodologies that you've learned in the first semester. And before you do that, actually, you still do a 6th course, a specialization course that is tied to the university where you go to. So you choose your 2nd semester partner university on the basis of what specialization do I want to do. You can also stay in Maastricht. Our specialization is science and public policy. So it's about public policy making. Elsewhere, they have specialization on sustainability, for example, on north-south relationships. There's one on disability studies. There's one on ethics of science and technology. There's one on history of technology. There's many different ones. We'll get to that in a second. So that's the program at large. First semester where you really, it's a crash course of approaches to science and technology. 2nd semester you specialize and you write a thesis about a particular topic, a substantial thesis, a big piece of work. So these are our 2nd semester partners currently. It changes a little bit sometimes. Some of them have more than 1 specialization, like in Athens they have 4 and in Oslo they have 2. This year, half the students went abroad. That's usually the case, about half. Half the students stayed here and then chose science and public policy. In addition to our EST partners, Maastricht University has 2 more parts. That's Liège, just across the border here in Belgium, and Moscow, a little bit further away, where they have an STS program, respectively, and a management of science and technology program. So you can also go there. And we also have students from there coming here. This year, no Liège students, but next year we'll have 4 or 5 again. We do have a woman from Moscow this year who came from their program. And sometimes our students go to Moscow for their 2nd semester, also a real adventure. Apart from the Maastricht University EST website, there's this one. Just remember these 6 letters, est.eu. That's the network site, and you can read much more about the specializations there. There's a lot of information. Finally, there's a 3rd possibility, and that's that you formally stay in Maastricht, but you actually do your thesis at an internship institution, where you work with somebody there towards a thesis. For example, sometimes students go to the Rathenau Institute for Technology Assessment in The Hague. That's an institution that tells the government this and that are the scenarios you can expect from a certain technological development, and this is how you can respond to that. Right? So that's what they do. They look into the future a little bit and try to estimate where things are going. Now, if you go there for an internship, you will help write part of these reports, and your part in it will then also become the core of the thesis that you're doing, right? So in the end, the internship would also need to lead to a normal thesis, not just to an internship report, but to the same sort of thesis. And there's a few other institutions where you can do this. Okay, here's a few titles of recent EST theses. I'll just leave them there for you to look at for a second. Again, if you have any remarks or questions, just speak up. Feel free to. I see we've only 2 people left, but that's not uncommon for the afternoon session. All right, let me move on. So now that you know about the subject matter and the structure of the program and the various perspectives that we offer, especially in the first semester, this is the teaching method that we apply. All teaching in Maastricht uses the method of problem-based learning. That means that lectures are there, but they are not the core of the program. So what you will be doing most of the time is not sitting in a lecture hall and listening. You'll do that too, but then often there's also discussions with the lecturer, especially since we're such a small group. It's easy. But the core of what you'll be doing is tutorials where you take a particular subject, you read a lot about it, and you discuss that with your fellow students. With, of course, a tutor present. That's usually the course coordinator, somebody like me, basically. That's really the core of the program, those discussions. And they become very lively because, you know, you're a group of students that shares this interest. Sometimes people are very passionate about it. So, and they all come from different backgrounds, which makes for a very rich discussion. Samuel can probably attest to that. Oh, I know he can, yeah. Apart from tutorials, we also have lectures, as I said, and skills trainings. So here you learn generic academic skills like formulating a proper research problem, research question, or more specific ones like interpreting archival sources, for example, or writing a policy brief. At the end, the core, I think, of what we teach is that if you want to understand science and technology in society, it's a thing that people make happen. Science and technology do not develop by themselves. In common parlance, we often think that way, right? That it's just progress that are pushing science and technology, and they happen to us, they overcome us. But we look at science and technology as things that are made by people in a particular context, interacting with the rest of the society and culture. And that's how we try to understand them, right? And if you look closely at those things, if you enter the lab, you can just see it, right? It's people who make the science there. It's not that they make it up, but they do the experiments and interpret them and write them up. And we need to understand what goes into that process if we understand how this relates to the rest of society. That's really the core inside, I think. Apart from that, what you'll learn, of course, is a lot of this, particular skills to understand these things, to understand also how other people understand particular developments, stakeholders, so to speak. And apart from the skills listed here, one generic Maastricht University skill, I think, comes from PBL, and that is that you are constantly working in small groups and discussing with others. So you learn how to do that, I mean, without even realizing it. And that is not an unimportant skill in any working situation, because that's usually what you need to do there, right? Collaborate with other people, enter discussions, and making the best out of it. It's not always easy to collaborate with other people. That's why you need practice, and you get a lot of practice in Maastricht. And this is what we generally say that as graduates are in the end. There are people who can take a large perspective on a particular science and technology and a problem and define what the issue is. Since they know so many different perspectives and stakeholders' views, they can build bridges between those. And that's unique because most people don't have that. They come from a particular angle, only from economics, for example, or only from engineering. And as such, generalists, then specialize, of course, in your thesis is very specialized. So you can combine this general viewpoint with the ability to really dig into a specific focus and study a specific issue. And I think that's sort of the strength of the program. The cosmopolitan quality I added here because that has to do with our classroom, but I'll get to that in a second. Now, last year, when we were preparing our report for the reaccreditation committee, we had to say something about where our students end up, professionally speaking. And grossly, when we researched that, we came to this, these sectors, and they're more or less evenly divided over that. So about a quarter of students stays at the university, goes on to do a PhD. Then a lot of people end up with government or semi-government institutions like the Radena Institute, for example. Several of our students have gone there, or ministries, or the European Commission, and that sort of thing. Consultancy firms have become a big employer. We have several students now working at Accenture from last year. That's a company that advises other companies about where to take their products and their technologies. And some people directly go to businesses like that. So there's a number of companies there that our students have ended up. Actually, we keep in touch via an alumni network on LinkedIn. So that's interesting to see, because sometimes these alumni ask questions to their fellow students or the students that came after them, to remind them of some STS literature that can help them out. STS, sorry, that's Science and Technology Studies. The people who come into EST, I can also say a few general things about that. They're a very mixed bunch. So they come from all kinds of backgrounds. This year we've had a couple of scientists and an engineer, and then we have people who come from international business, from international relations, some also this year from journalism, really different backgrounds. And that really makes it nice, because it means they all bring perspectives and experiences and expertises that complement each other. So it makes for very lively discussions. Sometimes one person knows a little bit more about the subject and sometimes the other. And they all have something extra to learn. Well, Samuel will probably say a few more things about it too. What also I personally find very attractive is that we're an extremely international program. This year we have students from, well, if you're Dutch, you're going to be in a small minority. I think we have only 2 Dutch students out of 20 this year, which is kind of normal. Then we have students from Germany, Belgium, the neighbor country, but also from much further away. Several from Austria now, like Samuel. We have a student from Latvia, one from Peru, Indonesia, South Africa this year, Ukraine, and even a student from the UK. As exotic as it sounds, well, they're no longer EU now. It's a little sad, but yeah. Anyway, European and non-European students. In a previous session, I just talked a little bit later with a student from Jordan, who's going to apply. That also makes it nice, because national experiences are also interesting. If you just think of the words science and technology and what they are in your own language, they're often very different things. And that the fact that they have different meanings, these words, says something about how science and technology are conceptualized in your own culture. I see we're losing attendance here. Nitsa, I hope you're going to stay, otherwise we can just stop. But I hope it's not.
I'm still listening.
Okay. Well, of course you're free to go, but I hope it's not my boring presentation.
No, of course not.
Who knows? All right. But you can see, right, how these national backgrounds really bring different things to the table. Our student from Peru now reminds us a few times, like, well, wait a minute, you can talk about how people are dealing with the corona crisis here, but it's not the same in all countries. And where she's from, they have a much larger lack of resources and political stability. So things are rather different there. And this is really an important that she brings that to the table, because then we realize, oh man, developments are different in different places.
This is exactly what I was thinking about these last few minutes, that the things you cover are kind of from a moralistic standpoint. And I'm thinking to myself, I wish that, in Israel would have these researchers saying you should do that and you should do this.
Right.
And I don't think our public decision making happens, after thorough research and
yeah. So these are
due
things to
process.
investigate. Yeah. The role of what roles the experts play in policy making. Yeah, it's one of the central EST themes. Actually, in the 5th module is devoted to that, but it's also something that a lot of students will write their theses on. And that's really different in different political systems, right? I think we've all become very aware of that over the last year.
Yeah. I also had a question about research methods, because so the reason I missed the first session was that I was in a session of the research masters in European studies.
Okay.
And they covered the different tracks you can choose with quantitative and qualitative research. I was wondering about that in this program.
Yeah, we're not a research master, so our point is not to train researchers. That is not to say that we don't do it. This sounds a little contradictory, but since you all have to write your thesis, you'll learn how to do it, right? So you'll learn how to undertake a research project and write the thesis. It's just that our research master's programs, like the one you went to, are really geared to training academic research and preparing for a PhD. And that's also possible with EST. There's plenty of EST students that continue to do a PhD, but it's not the only point of the program, right? So we also train people for other things. In that sense, it's a little bit less purely academic and more open. But it also means that our program is not only a research master program. Every module is geared toward teaching you research methods.
Okay, I thought the difference was a thesis or a taught master's, but I may be confused about that.
A thesis or what?
So I thought that if you wrote a thesis, it was a research master's.
No, not necessarily. This differs. For non-research masters, it's different things. But EST is actually quite researchy, so to speak. But we're not only for that, right? So most of our students end up not doing a PhD, but going elsewhere. But a lot of them also end up doing a PhD. But I think the point what I want to make is that our courses are not exclusively focused in teaching research methods.
Mm-hmm.
And that's different with also there's another research master at our faculty called CAST, Cultures of Art, Science and Technology. It has the subject matter overlaps actually to quite an extent with EST, but the teaching program is really different because from the get-go it's all about how to undertake a bit of research, whereas EST takes you through all the different STS theories and perspectives first.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that's not entirely clear, maybe, but well.
That answers my question.
Okay, excellent. All right. By the way, maybe that's all. Maybe good to know. It's also possible to combine these methods. So you can do EST for 1 year, and then the next year do 1 year out of a 2 years master's. So combine them in that way.
That's interesting. They didn't mention this.
No, it used to be formally possible, and now it's actually still possible, but you have to do it on your own initiative. Now, with European studies, that might be too far away from the EST subject matter. Could be possible, but you have to discuss it there. With the other one, it's certainly possible. Yeah.
I guess it depends on the research topic anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what it is. All right. I'm going to continue because I want to leave a little bit of time for Samuel as well. Right. Oh, but I come to the end already. At the end, almost. Well, these are the admission criteria. Since you're from outside the EU and it's on your deadline is much earlier in January, I believe.
I would be applying as an EU citizen.
Oh, you will be. Okay. Well, then you have. I'm not sure. So I forgot to change this deadline. Of course, it's not 1 June 2020. It's sometime in 2021, and it's probably also not exactly 1 June. I couldn't find the right deadline so quickly, but it's around that time anyway. You'll be able to figure out better than I am. And we have admissions people who can answer your questions as well. Some reasons to do EST, I think I've been through them already. I mentioned the 2 diplomas, our dedicated staff. And here's some stuff for more information. But let me hand the floor now to Samuel, because he's actually doing EST, so he can really tell you what it's like, and also what it's like to live in Maastricht.
Yes,
I'll
definitely.
stop sharing. Yeah, Samuel, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll share my screen then. It doesn't work. I'm not a host this time. But anyways, I might as well use the time already. So yes, now it works. Wait, there we go. Picture. So yes, perfect. Okay, yeah. I'm gonna just quickly talk about a couple of things as a student of MIS. And so out of a student's perspective, I have to say, first of all, I think it is a very intense program. So you will always have like 4 weeks of one course. I mean, of course, the positive side is that you only have to focus on one course, whereas at other universities, you have to have different courses at the same time. I think that really helps to get into a certain subject if you can just focus on one thing. But still, one thing that I want to point out is compared to other universities, maybe the reading workload is much higher than you're used to. Compared to my bachelor's, it's much higher, but in the end, I think that's good in a sense, because in a way it prepares you for the discussions, and you really have to go to the discussions prepared, because of course in the end it will bring more interesting findings forward. Most of our exams actually are written papers, or in one case even a presentation. So you don't have to worry about just replicating knowledge that was given to you on an exam for certain questions. You can actually choose your own topic for all of the papers that we're supposed to write, and then actually analyze that topic out of a certain perspective, or what the assignment will be. Besides from that, we actually also did learn to do interviews. We had that in our last course, that we interviewed an expert and then ended the course with a presentation about our findings with that interview. And another important aspect right now, of course, is in times of COVID, that we do a lot of hybrid teaching. So our fellow students, for example, those who weren't able to come to the Netherlands, were still able to participate in all courses from the beginning on. And now we're finally at a point where I think all the people are here in Maastricht and can participate offline. But still, some classes might still are still online on Zoom, because of course there are limited spaces in the university buildings to actually teach. Another thing that was already mentioned by Geert is like what I really enjoy about this program is that there are like very interactive debates, and that's especially because we have like international background. I think it's 12 nationalities this year, and a very interdisciplinary background, which always gives nice different perspectives on certain subjects and adds a lot of value to the discussions. Another thing that was highly different in my bachelor's, I don't know how you feel about that, but in my bachelor's we always we already tended to dislike teamwork, because you would always have one person that isn't that contributing to the teamwork. But that's not the case here in Master Est. I feel like like everyone is highly engaged, highly motivated, dedicated to contribute, which is a great plus in the end. And yeah, I'm gonna skip this specialization abroad that was already talked about. And yeah, I mean, Maastricht itself, I feel it's a great city to live in as a student, especially because I think like 25% of the population are students. So that's quite a lot, and that also leads to two funny situations where you meet other students or fellow students in situations where you wouldn't expect that actually. but that's also a great thing. And right now, of course, since bars, restaurants, and clubs or other things are closed because of COVID, it might be hard to find people to hang out with or to build up new friendships. But I think there are a lot of things in Maastricht that help you to get around with that. One thing definitely is Sports, where you can do different sports classes. They offer walk-in sessions in like every kind of sport, like from badminton, basketball, volleyball, yoga, Pilates, everything, and you just pay a small annual fee and can participate in as many classes as you want. Another important thing to mention are the associations, like Maastricht itself, like I feel there, like I don't know an exact number, but there are so many associations that you could join and use to actually get to know people. So I think that's also a good workaround in times of COVID. And another super important thing about Maastricht is that everything is in walking distance, and I think that's something that I really enjoy, because you can you just walk 10 minutes and you're already outside of the city and you're directly into nature, and can really use that to find like a nice balance between studying and also enjoying the environment. And one more thing that I want to add before I'll leave the floor to you to questions is like, what is really good about this master's is you can really feel it's student centered. So our professors are highly ambitious and dedicated to teach us, but also to ask for our feedback. And I think that's something that I learned really to appreciate by now, because for example, in Austria, where I'm from originally, normally you can always feel this type of hierarchy between students and professors, and I think that's definitely not the case here. Like it's a very informal communication and a very open environment, so you can actually study and talk about issues from different perspectives without having the fear to speak up. So yeah, that's that from me. And Nitzan, do you have any questions?
Thank you. Actually, not really. I have been thinking for a few years about doing a master's. I finished my bachelor's 4 years ago. So this is one subject that I was thinking about, like the intersection of public affairs and technology.